In a small town, nestled in the heart of America, where the summer sun beat down on weathered asphalt and neon signs flickered to life as dusk approached, an old man named Samuel shuffled into the local bar. His wrinkled hands, marked by age spots and scars, gripped a worn cane as he made his way to a stool at the far end of the counter. The bartender, a kind-faced woman with graying hair, nodded in recognition and poured him his usual whiskey neat. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the low hum of conversation punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses and burst of laughter. Samuel sat quietly, his eyes distant, lost in memories of a time long past. He barely noticed when the door swung open, admitting a group of leather-clad bikers who swaggered in their boots, echoing on the wooden floor. The leader, a burly man with a graying beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, scanned the room with narrowed eyes. His gaze settled on Samuel, and a smirk played across his lips. He nudged his companions, jerking his head in the old man's direction. They sauntered over, surrounding Samuel like predators circling their prey. Well, what do we have here?" The leader sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like someone's lost their way to the retirement home." Samuel remained still, his weathered face a mask of calm. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, savoring the burn as it slid down his throat. The bikers exchanged glances, their initial amusement turning to irritation at the old man's lack of response. "Hey, old-timer," one of them barked, leaning in close. "We're talking to you. Don't you know it's rude to ignore your betters?" Samuel set down his glass and turned to face them, his eyes suddenly sharp and clear. "I heard you just fine, son," he said, his voice steady and strong. "I just didn't think you'd said anything worth responding to." The bar fell silent, all eyes turning to watch the confrontation. The bikers' faces darkened with anger, their hands clenching into fists. The leader stepped forward, towering over Samuel. "You've got a smart mouth for an old man," he growled. "Maybe we need to teach you some respect." Samuel chuckled, a sound that seemed to surprise even himself. "Respect?" he repeated, shaking his head. "Let me tell you something about respect, boys. I earned mine on the beaches of Normandy, watching my friends die around me as we fought for something bigger than ourselves. I earned it in the skies over Germany, where every mission could have been my last. I earned it coming home to a country that didn't know what to do with us, trying to build a life while carrying the weight of what we'd seen and done." The bikers' expressions shifted from anger to confusion, then to dawning realization as Samuel continued to speak. His voice, though soft, carried throughout the bar, holding everyone in rapt attention. "I'm 90 years old," Samuel said, his eyes meeting each of the bikers in turn. "I've seen more of life and death than you could imagine. So if you think you can intimidate me with your leather jackets and tough talk, you've got another thing coming." The leader of the bikers took a step back, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. You're a World War II vet?" he stammered. Samuel nodded, a sad smile playing across his lips. 101 Est Airborne Division. We jumped into Normandy on D-Day. I was there at Bastogne, surrounded by the Germans in the dead of winter. I saw things no man should ever have to see, and I did things I'll carry with me for the rest of my days." The bar was silent, the only sound the soft clink of ice in Samuel's glass as he took another sip of whiskey. The bikers looked at each other, shame and embarrassment evident on their faces. "Sir," the leader said, his voice now filled with respect, "We had no idea. We're sorry for our behavior. Can we buy you a drink?" Samuel looked at them for a long moment, then nodded. "I'd like that," he said. "And while we're at it, why don't you boys pull up a chair? I've got some stories to tell if you're interested in hearing them." As the bikers gathered around, their earlier bravado replaced by genuine interest and respect, Samuel began to speak. He told them of the camaraderie he'd found in the midst of war, of the fear and courage that walked hand in hand through every battle. He spoke of the friends he'd lost and the memories he carried. His words, painting vivid pictures of a world, both terrible and beautiful. The night wore on, and more patrons gathered around to listen. Young and old men and women, they sat in silence, captivated by Samuel's tales. In his words, they found echoes of their own struggles and triumphs, their own fears and hopes. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Samuel finished his last story. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing in them a reflection of the young men he'd fought alongside so many years ago. "Remember this," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "We're all fighting our own battles, carrying our own scars. But it's in coming together, in sharing our stories and our strength, that we find the courage to keep going. That's the real victory, not just surviving, but living with compassion and understanding for one another." The bikers nodded, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. As Samuel stood to leave, they rose as one, forming an honor guard to escort him to the door. The leader stepped forward, extending his hand. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for your service, for your stories, and for teaching us what real strength looks like." Samuel shook his hand, a smile lighting up his weathered face. As he stepped out into the morning light, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For years he'd carried his memories alone, but now in sharing them, he'd found a new kind of freedom. The sun rose over the small town, casting long shadows and painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Samuel walked slowly down the street, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the sidewalk. Behind him, a group of bikers watched him go, their respect and admiration evident in their silence. In that moment, the barriers of age and appearance fell away, replaced by a shared understanding of the human spirit's resilience. It was a reminder that heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most profound connections.